Over the past 30 years, natural disasters, storms, floods and droughts have increased threefold, according to the UN's International Strategy for Disaster Reduction. When extreme weather strikes, the poor are usually hit hardest. Tropical storms, floods and droughts account for 75% of all disasters. Disaster relief agencies try to pick up the pieces, but increasingly governments and UN agencies are going one step further, aiming to reduce damage before it strikes. Earth Report investigates how poor farmers in Honduras and fishing communities in Vietnam are working with disaster risk managers to strengthen nature's defences against the violent effects of climate change. Vietnam is one of the most natural disaster-prone countries in the world. Typhoons and violent storms are frequent, 8 in 2006, with often calamitous consequences. The country's entire 3,000-kilometre coastline is low-lying and vulnerable. In the northern provinces, an extensive sea dike system has been in place for centuries. The dikes give some protection, but not against storms classified level 8 or above. Waves over 3.5 metres are simply too powerful. Between 1995 and 2004, natural disasters claimed almost 6,000 lives in Vietnam. Over 320,000 houses were destroyed, costing the country's overstretched economy an estimated $2.5 billion. Relief agencies dealt with the aftermath. In 1994, Vietnam's Red Cross decided to try a new approach, preventing or at least reducing disaster before it happens. The Coastal Environmental Preservation Programme involves local communities in planting mangrove forests along the shoreline. Dang Van Thao has been involved in the project from the very start.
The mangrove project done by Vietnam Red Cross bring to it is a green one to protect the sea dike system, where the dike and the people are at risk, and it's active involvement of the local people, of the community, from the planning to the implementation and the monitoring and protection of the mangrove.
2/3 of Vietnam's population earn their living from agriculture. Villagers help plant the mangroves, supporting the project from the very outset. Mangrove trees are planted along the coast to protect vulnerable communities, as well as their dikes, shrimp farms and rice fields. Over 100 kilometres of coastline have been planted with the trees since 1994. Today the planting extends over a kilometre into the sea. The mangroves act like a giant breakwater. Storm waves are reduced to harmless ripples by the time they reach the coastal sea dikes. This is Tan Tan Commune, 100 kilometres from Hanoi City in the north of the country. It's home to around 4,000 people. Here the dike protects the industry that is the backbone of this community: shrimp farming. Hung, a shrimp farmer from Tan Tan, is a strong supporter of the mangrove project.
The mangroves play an important part in our lives.
They
stop heavy waves from causing damage and protect the dike. They also ensure the ecosystem is balanced. The shrimp and fish under the water bring many benefits to the people here.
The Tan Tan People's Committee acts as the commune's meeting point. Regular classes are held here for local farmers. Hung now sings at classes like these throughout the region. reminding farmers of the importance of preserving the mangroves. Among the roots of the mangroves, shrimp, crab and fish thrive, attracting the attentions of local fishermen. Although the pickings are easy in the mud at low tide, tree roots can be easily damaged. At high tide, these roots become invisible, but fishermen persist. Guards based out at sea monitor the activities of these fishermen. Bui Van Song is one of these.
We are protecting the mangroves from the people who try and go into the forests to cut down the trees to make firewood. We are also protecting them from fishermen who come here to find shrimp or fish. They damage the roots of the trees when they are digging around for shrimp, and this kills the trees.
Now even fish stocks have increased, and fishermen, like Nguyen Van Tok, are reaping the benefits.
Because of the mangroves, the number of fish and other species here has gone up a lot. In the past, without mangroves, there were smaller numbers of fish and other species. Mangroves are very helpful to our lives and to nature and the environment.
Although Tan Tan is now protected by 3 kilometres of mangroves, 2 kilometres of nearby coastline remain unprotected. Here, diggers are busy rebuilding the dike after damage caused by a recent storm. Adverse conditions in this section of coastline have meant repeated attempts to plant mangroves have failed. Farms here are at risk.
The land here is very sandy. When we try and plant the mangroves here using the tried and tested methods, the trees simply do not survive. They are dragged away by the waves. It is very hard to plant here. So we need to find and develop new ways of planting the trees so that they can survive on coastlines like this, where the waves can be very strong. Maybe by growing the trees elsewhere first.
A further 2,900 kilometres of coastline in Vietnam remain unprotected. With funding for the project ending in 2010, financing for the continuation and expansion of the mangroves will need to be found elsewhere. Pham Duc Thuan is the Deputy Director of the Forestry Department.
We would welcome the Red Cross to continue this project, but if the Red Cross does not continue after 2010, then we will do all we can to find a way of ensuring it is continued. As well as government budgets, we will search for investment and funding elsewhere, including our business and private sector enterprises.
It's estimated the project has cut the cost of dike maintenance by $7.3 million a year. To date, around 20,000 hectares of forest have been planted. This represents up to 8% of the total national target of 250,000 hectares in the entire country. There's much more to be done. So what of the future? With climate change now recognized as a problem, it's widely accepted that extreme weather will become more frequent and more severe in years to come.
with increased awareness of the fact that climate change will just simply increase the risk of a typhoon or a storm surge or another risk to increase, the conclusion is very obvious. Then that is that more investment is needed in more mangrove planting, but also stronger dikes.
From sea to land. In a moment, we'll see how farmers in Honduras are protecting against disasters. For today's young inhabitants in the Honduran capital of Tegucigalpa, there are no memories of the devastation left by Hurricane Mitch nearly a decade ago. As people continue with daily life, subtle remnants of the city's painful past remain, etched on riverside homes. When Hurricane Mitch ripped its way through Central America in 1998, Honduras was hit hardest. 18,000 people died. More than 3 million were left homeless, and devastating structural and agricultural damage totaled over $6 million. 80% of the country is mountainous. Honduras's vulnerability lay in the degraded condition of its hillsides. Too many trees had been felled for firewood. The rain that Mitch brought with it turned the treeless and eroded slopes into lethal mudslides. But there was one part of Honduras, the region of Lempira, that managed to feed not only itself, but the rest of the country during the worst of the storm. Situated in the remote western hills of Honduras, bordering with El Salvador, this impoverished area also suffered extensive damage at the hands of Mitch.
How could this poor, backward area that was known in the national consciousness as receiving food aid provide food aid to those parts of the country which were supposedly the most developed, yet were the ones that suffered most in Mitch?
6 years before Hurricane Mitch, Ian Cherritt and Luis Alvarez, with support from the Dutch and Honduran governments, led the UN's technical team credited with changing Lempira's fortunes. Luis Alvarez couldn't know at that point that his efforts would pay off so handsomely 6 years later.
When we arrived in Lempira in 1992, there was only 16,000 hectares of forest, but 1,000 were being destroyed every year. At that rate, we wouldn't have a forest left. If you hadn't been here before, you wouldn't know the difference.
Farmers used to burning the land were ruining Lempira's natural ability to withstand heavy rains and erosion.
Slash and burn agriculture is the agricultural equivalent of a fast food economy, because it's a very easy, simple process. You cut down the bush, the trees, and you set fire and you plant. Once you've had one harvest, two harvests, it's no use. You have to move on because the soil is no longer fertile. The problem is, once the number of people grew and the density of the population grew, there was nowhere to move on to.
It left large tracts of hillside bare and very vulnerable to erosion and landslides. In their quest to stop